There are nights the mountains remember. Not the storms. Not the cold. The mountains remember the moments just before when the air goes still in a way that has nothing to do with weather. When the snow stops falling not because it has finished, but because something has told it to wait. Lena Calloway would tell you she doesn't believe in signs. She would tell you she is a practical woman. A quiet woman. A woman who moved to the edge of Ashwood Mountain with 2 bags, a medical kit, and the very deliberate intention of being forgotten by the rest of the world. She would tell you all of that. And then she would go very quiet the way people go quiet when the truth is sitting in the room and they haven't decided yet whether to introduce it. Because Lena Calloway woke up one morning to 6 wolves sitting in the snow outside her cabin window. Not circling, not hunting, sitting, still as stone, patient as grief, watching her with eyes that did not look entirely like animal eyes. And the thing that should frighten you, the thing that should have frightened her is not that they were there. It is that some part of her body, something older than her name and deeper than her memory already knew why. 3 nights before those wolves appeared on her mountain, Lena made a choice. Not a heroic choice. Not a chosen one's destiny unfolding on cue. Just a woman, standing alone in a blizzard, at the edge of a frozen river hearing something cry out in the dark. She pulled 6 wolf pups from the ice that night. One by one, each one heavier than it looked. Each one colder than anything living should be allowed to survive. She did not know, as she carried them back through the snow with frost burning her lungs and her coat wrapped around bodies that were not her own, she did not know that she was being watched. That the forest was watching. That something ancient in the tree line was taking note of exactly who she was and what she was. She did not know those pups belonged to the Alpha King of the Iron Fang Pack. The most feared bloodline in the Northern Realm. A man, if you can still call him that, who had not shown mercy in 6 years of ruling. Who had not needed to. Who had built his dominion on the one truth every wolf understands before it understands anything else. The strong do not ask. They simply are. But here is what the mountain knows. Here is what the night remembers. The moment Lena pulled the last pup from that river, the moment she pressed its small, frozen body against her chest and whispered, "I've got you. I've got you," into the dark, something shifted. Not in the forest. Not in the Alpha's bloodline. Not in the ancient laws that govern what humans are allowed to know and what they are not. Something shifted inside of her. Quiet, cellular. The way a key turns in a lock that has never been opened. She didn't feel it then. She was too cold, too focused, too human. She would feel it later. When the wolves came to her window. When she looked into the eyes of a man who should have frightened her more than anything she had ever faced, and her blood didn't run cold. It was warm. Warmer than it had any right to. Warmer than it had ever been. This is the story of Lena Calloway. A woman who came to the mountain to disappear. And instead, found. By something she cannot explain. By something that has been waiting longer than she has been alive for exactly her. Before we go further into what happened, you need to understand who Lena Calloway was before the river. Before the pups. Before the wolves at the window. Before the man with gold in his eyes who stood in her doorway like he had been carved out of the mountain itself and simply waited to be found. You need to understand who she was so you understand what it cost her to become who she is. Lena was 27 years old. She had steady hands, a quiet mouth, and the particular kind of stillness that only comes to people who have held someone's life between their palms and felt it leave. She had been a field medic. Not the kind that works in clean hospitals under good lighting. The kind that works in the dark. In the dirt. In places where the difference between living and dying is measured in seconds and the steadiness of one pair of hands. She had been very good at it. And then one night in a place she does not name, in a moment she does not describe, she wasn't good enough. She packed 2 bags 8 months ago. Drove north until the roads got narrow. I kept driving until the roads ran out. Found a cabin at the edge of Ashwood Forest that the realtor seemed almost relieved to be rid of and paid for a full year in cash. She asked no questions about the forest. The realtor did not offer any answers. Both of them pretended this was normal. The town nearest to her cabin was called Crestholm. Small, quiet. The kind of town that has been keeping the same secret for so long it no longer remembers keeping it. It has simply become the way things are. The things you don't say. The roads you don't take after dark. The part of the map where the forest begins that nobody draws a line through. The people of Crestholm were kind to Lena in the careful way that mountain people are kind to outsiders, with warmth at a distance. With welcome that stops precisely at the point where questions would begin. She came in for supplies twice a month. Said thank you. Said nothing else. They watched her go with the particular expression of people who know something the other person doesn't and have decided, out of either mercy or cowardice, not to say it. At night, in Crestholm, you could hear the forest. Not the wind through the trees. You learn to know that sound. You stop hearing it after a while, the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. Something else. Howls that began like animal sound and then shifted, stretched into something that used animal sound the way a word uses letters. Something structured underneath. Something that understood itself. Children in Crestholm were taught before they could read, do not go into Ashwood after dark. They were not told why. They were not told why because the adults of Crestholm had also never been told why. Only hand the rule the way you hand a child a coat in winter. Not because the child understands the cold. Because you do. People had gone into that forest and not come back. Not many. Not often enough to make the news in any city that would care about a town this small. But enough. Always enough. Lena heard the howls at night from her cabin. She noted them the way she noted everything clinically. Filed them. Moved on. She did not go into the forest. Not because she was afraid. Because she was not interested. Because the world beyond her porch had stopped being something she wanted to move through. Because grief, real grief, does not always announce itself as grief. Sometimes it arrives as a preference for stillness. A preference for four walls and firelight and the uncomplicated company of wounded things. She had begun finding animals. Or perhaps they had begun finding her. It is difficult, in retrospect, to say which direction that current was moving. A fox with a broken leg, left at the edge of her tree line one morning as if placed there deliberately. A hawk with a damaged wing that appeared on her windowsill and simply waited. A deer she found caught in old wire near the road, trembling, too exhausted to fight. She treated them all, set the bones, cleaned the wounds, sat with them through the nights they couldn't regulate their own warmth. She did not name them. She told herself she did not name them because she was not sentimental. Because they were animals, not companions. Because the point was to heal them and release them, not to hold on. The mountain knew better. She named every single one. She just never said the names out loud. Now, what Lena did not know, what no human in Crestholm had ever been permitted to know, what the realtor and the townsfolk and the children with their inherited warnings had never been told was this. Ashwood Forest was not simply a forest. It was a border, a threshold between the world humans moved through in their ordinary lives with their ordinary certainties, their ordinary blindness, and the Northern Realm. The Northern Realm, a world that has existed alongside the human one since before humans had language for what they feared in the dark. A world governed not by the laws men write down and argue over but by older law. Blood law, pack law, the kind of law that does not need to be enforced because it is simply understood the way the body understands cold before the mind names it. In the Northern Realm, there were many packs, scattered across territories that stretched from the northern range to the coastal cliffs. Each with their own alpha. Each with their own borders, their own codes, their own particular way of surviving in a world that had spent centuries trying to convince itself they didn't exist. But of all the packs in the Northern Realm, of all the bloodlines and territories and names spoken with lowered eyes, there was one that stood above the rest. The Iron Fang Pack. You did not whisper that name lightly. You did not whisper it at all, if you were wise. The Iron Fang Pack had held dominion over the Northern Realm for 3 generations. And for the last 6 years since the night their previous alpha fell and a 24-year-old took the bloodline in both hands and refused to let it break, they had been ruled by one man. Alpha King Caden Voss. He was not a man known for softness. He was known for precision. For control so complete it read, at a distance, as coldness. For the particular brand of authority that does not need a raised voice because it has never once needed to be questioned. 6 years of rule. No territory lost, no challenge unanswered, no weakness shown, none, except one, his siblings, 6 of them, the youngest members of the Iron Fang bloodline. Pups, still not yet old enough to hold their shift, not yet old enough to understand borders and the laws that make borders mean something. Old enough to wander. On the night of the worst blizzard the Northern Realm had seen in a decade, while Caden was managing a territorial dispute on the pack's eastern border, his 6 youngest siblings slipped past the pack's boundary markers. Into the storm, toward the river, toward the edge of the world they were permitted to know. And into the hands of a human woman who asked no questions and kept no friends but who had never, in her life, Been able to walk away from something small and cold and running out of time. The mountain had been waiting for this night. It had been waiting, perhaps, since the moment Lena Calloway paid cash for a cabin at the edge of a forest she was never supposed to enter and moved in alone. With her steady hands and her unnamed animals and her grief she carried so quietly you could almost miss it. Almost. The mountain does not miss things. The night remembers. And it had been remembering Lena Calloway for a very long time. It began, as most things that change a life begin, with something so small you almost missed it. Not a vision, not a warning, not the kind of dramatic sign that announces itself with thunder and makes a good story later. A sound, small, broken, carried on the wind for just a moment before the blizzard swallowed it again. The kind of sound that, if you were anyone else, if you were someone whose instincts had not been sharpened by years of listening for the difference between a person who still had time and a person who didn't, you would have told yourself was the wind. You would have pulled your coat tighter. You would have kept walking. Lena stopped. She had been in Crestholm for supplies. A trip she made twice a month, always before dark, always back before the temperature dropped below the point where the road home became something to negotiate rather than simply travel. She had been running late. The blizzard had moved in faster than the morning sky had suggested. By the time she reached the mountain road it was already the kind of storm that doesn't negotiate, the kind that simply arrives and informs you that your plans were always its plans, and it has revised them. She was 20 minutes from her cabin. The river ran alongside the road here, frozen at the edges, still moving at the center, that particular shade of black that freezing water turns at night when the temperature is serious about what it intends to do. And from the riverbank below the road, down a slope of snow-buried rock came the sound. Not quite a bark, not quite a cry, something between the two, something desperate in a way that bypassed the ears entirely and landed somewhere older, somewhere in the chest, in the gut, in the part of a person that existed before language and knows, without being told, when something small is dying. She stood at the road's edge for 4 seconds. She counted them later. She doesn't know why she counted them, perhaps because 4 seconds was long enough to prove to herself that she had, in fact, considered the alternative. That she had waited. That what she did next was a choice and not simply a reflex. The forest was to her left. The town's warnings lived somewhere in the back of her mind, dusty and distant. Do not go near Ashwood after dark. Do not follow sounds into the trees. Do not. The riverbank was not the forest. The riverbank was just a riverbank. She went down the slope. There were 6 of them. Tangled in the ice at the river's shattered edge where the bank had given way and the frozen surface had cracked and something small and not yet strong enough to fight water had gone in and not been able to get back out. 6 wolf pups. Small enough that her mind registered them first as strange, too small, too young, wrong season for this before it registered what they were. 2 of them were still. Not sleeping still. The other kind. One had a leg bent at an angle that told her everything she needed to know about what the ice had done when it gave way. The remaining 4 were moving barely. The shallow, slowing movement of bodies that have been cold for too long and have begun, on a cellular level, to consider stopping. Her mind ran the calculation the way it always had, fast, clinical, automatic. Hypothermia, all 6. Fracture, 1. Unconscious, 2. Breathing, just alive on a margin so thin it was less a margin and more a courtesy the body was extending, temporarily, before it revised its position. Her mind also said, these are wolves. Wild animals. You are alone on a mountain road in a blizzard and the nearest help is 20 minutes away and these are not your responsibility and you are already cold and the smart thing, the rational, self-preserving, reasonable thing is to leave. Her hands were already in the water. She did not decide to reach in. The decision had been made the moment she heard the sound on the road. Perhaps before that. Perhaps the decision had been made 8 months ago when she drove north until the roads ran out, carrying her medical kit like a relic she hadn't renounced yet only relocated. She pulled the first pup free of the ice with both hands. It was heavier than it looked. They always are the ones that are still fighting. The ones that have taken on water, taken on cold, and are holding it all inside their small bodies with a stubbornness that has nothing to do with thinking and everything to do with the part of a living thing that simply refuses. She pressed it against her chest and felt it shudder. Alive. Barely. But alive is alive. Barely is enough to work with. She moved fast after that. Her coat came off first, wrapped around the first 3 she pulled free, bundled against her body with one arm while the other arm kept reaching. Her scarf. She couldn't keep the gloves, she needed her hands. The gloves went around the two smallest ones and she told herself she would not think about what her fingers felt like. She did not think about what her fingers felt like. The one with the broken leg she wrapped at last, most carefully, splinting the leg against her forearm with the only thing she had left, the flannel layer beneath her coat, torn into strips with her teeth in the dark while the blizzard decided to escalate its position. 4 in her arms. 3 she could not carry at once. She looked at the 3 she was leaving, she looked at them in a way that was not leaving, that was promising, and she went up the slope. 20 minutes to the cabin. She did it at 11. She does not remember running. She remembers the snow against her face. She remembers her lungs making a sound she had heard before, in the field, in people who were pushing past what the body had budgeted for that day. She remembers thinking, later. You can feel this later. Right now you move. She laid them by the cold fireplace not lit yet, she hadn't had time, and went back. Down the slope, back to the river, back into the dark, for 3 more. The second trip was harder. Her hands had stopped reporting sensation with any accuracy. The cold had moved past her skin and was working on the architecture underneath, the kind of cold that doesn't burn anymore, that has passed burning and arrived at something quieter and considerably more serious. She picked up the last 3 pups. She held them the way you hold things you are not willing to lose. And she walked back up the mountain. She did not know what she was saving. She knew only that they were small and cold, and that the particular sound they had made in the dark, that broken, desperate sound that was not quite a bark and not quite a cry, was the sound of something that still wanted to be alive. And Lena Calloway had never, in all her years of steady hands and hard nights, been able to look that sound in the face and walk away from it. It was the thing that had made her extraordinary in the field. It was the thing that had broken her. It was the thing that, standing in the dark on a mountain in a blizzard with 6 wolf pups and no coat, was the most essentially, irreducibly herself she had been in 8 months. She didn't think about that. She lit the fireplace. What followed was the kind of night Lena understood better than most. The kind with no margin for anything except the work. She built the fire first, fast, higher than she'd normally run it. She needed the room warm, not comfortable. Warm the way a body needs when it has spent too long being the wrong temperature and needs the world around it to make an argument in the other direction. She laid them out on the rug in front of the fire. Assess each one in order, fastest first, most critical last, the way you triage when you cannot do everything at once and must make peace with that. The 2 unconscious ones, she checked their airways first. Breathing slow, shallow, but present. She elevated their heads, monitored. The broken leg she worked on that second. Clean fracture. The ice had been brutal but precise. She splinted it properly this time, with actual materials, her hands moving through the familiar steps with a muscle memory that did not require her to think. This was the only language grief had not taken from her. Her hands still knew what to do. She warmed them slowly, the way you must. The way that requires patience when every instinct says faster. When the gap between too cold and warm enough looks like a distance you want to cross at a run but can only cross at a walk. She monitored their breathing. She watched the color come back, incrementally, the way dawn comes, not announced, not sudden, just gradually less dark until you realize it has become light without being able to identify the exact moment it changed. She talked to them, quietly. Not words exactly, just sound. The low, continuous sound she had learned, in the field, that living things respond to when they are afraid and in pain and need something to orient toward. Something that says, you are not alone. Something that says, I am here. Something that says, stay. By 4 in the morning, all 6 were breathing. Steady. Slow. The deep, recovering breath of bodies that have been to the edge of themselves and been brought back and are now, finally, doing the unconscious animal work of rebuilding warmth from the inside out. They were sleeping. 6 small wolves, pressed together by the fireplace in Lena Calloway's cabin, alive in ways they had not been 3 hours earlier. She sat back in her chair. She meant to stay awake, to keep monitoring, to be responsible about this the way she was responsible about everything, precisely, completely, without the luxury of rest until the work was finished. She was asleep in under a minute. Her head tipped against the chair back. Her hands, those steady, frost-bitten, remarkable hands, rested open in her lap. She did not dream, or if she did not remember. What she did not notice, what she could not have noticed, sleeping as deeply as a person sleeps when their body has finally collected what it is owed, was the forest outside her window. The way it had gone quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a mountain after a blizzard, the settling quiet, the snow-muffled quiet, the world exhaling after something quiet. Something else, a silence with weight to it. With presence. The silence of a forest that is not empty. The silence of something at the tree line that has found what it was looking for and is, very still, very deliberately, deciding what to do next. The night remembers this moment. Remember the firelight through the window. The 6 small bodies breathing in unison. The woman asleep in the chair with frost still caught in her hair. Remember the exact second the forest stopped pretending it was empty. And something at its edge, something large, and controlled, and burning with a fury it had not yet decided the shape of, went still. And watched. And waited. As it had always known, on some level it would never admit to that this moment was always going to come. That she was always going to be on the other side of that window. That the river had always been going to give her exactly this. While Lena slept. While 6 wolf pups breathed slowly back into themselves by a fire, they had no language to be grateful for. While the blizzard finished its business with the mountain and moved on, leaving behind it the particular silence of a world that has been rearranged and not yet looked at itself. 40 miles deep in Ashwood Forest, something was already moving. I had been moving for 2 days. Had not stopped. You need to understand something about Caden Voss before you understand what happened next. You need to understand what he was, not just what he ruled, not just what he commanded, but what he had made of himself in the 6 years since the night the Iron Fang bloodline passed to him in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time, and he had simply absorbed it. Take it in, take it whole, stood under the full weight of it without bending. He was 30 years old. He had the kind of stillness that large, dangerous things develop when they have learned that movement is a resource and stillness is a statement. The kind of authority that does not announce itself because it has never needed to. The kind of control that is not cold though it reads as cold, at a distance, but is in fact something more demanding than cold. Cold is an absence. What Caden Voss carried was a presence. Constant. Calibrated. The presence of a man who had decided, at 24, standing over everything he had lost, that he would never again be in a position where something he loved could be taken from him by surprise. He had built his entire dominion around that decision. 6 years. Not a single territory lost. Not a single challenge left unanswered. Not a single moment in which the Iron Fang pack had cause to wonder whether their Alpha King was equal to what was being asked of him. He was always equal. He had never given himself the option of being anything else. His siblings were the one place his control had a different texture. 6 of them. The youngest children of a bloodline that had given almost everything it had to give. The last thing his parents had left behind before the night that left Caden standing alone with a title and a grief he converted, immediately and completely, into governance. He did not speak about them softly. He did not speak about them at all, to most people. But the pack knew the way a pack always knows the things. Their alpha does not say that the 6 youngest members of the Iron Fang bloodline were the one variable in Caden Voss's otherwise absolute equation. The one place the math had a feeling in it. They had been missing for 2 days. 2 days, 4 hours, and though he would not have admitted to counting the 37 minutes. The storm had moved in fast, the way the northern storms do when they have decided not to give warning. The pups had been at the eastern boundary of the territory supervised, or what had passed for supervised, which had proven not to be sufficient when the blizzard arrived and the boundary markers were swallowed by white and something in 6 young, unformed, not yet controlled instincts had simply followed the wind in the wrong direction. Into the un-territory. Toward the human border. Toward the river. Caden had not slept. This is not a detail offered for sympathy. It is offered because it is relevant, because a man who has not slept for 2 days in a blizzard, who has been moving through his territory with 40 of his best wolves in every configuration of search pattern the pack's collective knowledge could produce, who has been carrying for 48 hours the particular weight of not knowing, that man arrives at information differently than a rested one. He arrives raw, underneath the control, underneath the authority, underneath the 6 years of architecture he had built around himself. He arrives at the truth of a thing without the usual distance between feeling it and showing it. This matters. Remember it. The tracker found the scent just before dawn. Young Ren, the Iron Fang's best nose, the one they used when the trail was old or compromised or buried under conditions that would defeat anyone with less precision, came back to Caden at a run, which was itself information, because Ren did not run to deliver good news and did not run to deliver news that required softening. Ren ran when the news was simply true and needed to arrive quickly. The scent trail was confirmed. All 6 pups. Alive. Ren was certainly alive as of some hours ago. The trail led out of the forest, past the boundary, down the mountain road, to a human structure, a cabin, at the edge of the tree line, on the wrong side of everything the Iron Fang pack had spent generations maintaining. A human had his siblings. The thought arrived in Caden's chest not as a thought but as a temperature. Every controlled, calibrated, precisely maintained aspect of who he had built himself to be registered the information and produced, underneath all of it, something that was not governance and not authority and was not the measured response of an alpha king managing a situation. It was older than that. It was the part of him that existed before the title, before the loss, before the decision to convert everything into strength and leave no room for anything that could be used against him. It was furious, clean, absolute, the kind that doesn't shake, the kind that goes very, very still. The last human who had crossed into Iron Fang territory had done so accidentally as a hiker, wrong trail, wrong season. Had been escorted to the boundary and delivered a warning that had, by all accounts, permanently resolved that individual's interest in mountain hiking. That had been a trespass. This was something else. His pack's young, his blood, in a human's hands, in a human structure, behind a human's walls, and he had not been asked, had not been informed, had not been given the courtesy of knowing for 2 days and 4 hours and 37 minutes while he moved through a blizzard looking for them. Caden Voss did not give warnings. He gave conclusions. He signaled the pack forward. 40 wolves moved through the pre-dawn dark toward the cabin at the mountain's edge. Not fast. There was no need for fast. Fast is for things that might escape. Fast is for uncertainty about outcome. They moved with the particular, unhurried precision of a force that has already decided how this ends and is simply completing the formality of arriving. Through the snow, through the tree line, spreading wide around the perimeter of the cabin in a silence so complete that the only sound was the settling of snow under 40 sets of paws, and even that was barely sound at all. It was intentional, wearing a costume of sound. At the tree line, Caden stopped. He stood for a moment in his wolf form and then, with the particular internal shift that never becomes ordinary no matter how many times it happens, he came back to himself. To the human shape. To the face and the hands and the form that moved through doorways and read expressions and was capable of delivering, precisely and without ambiguity, the message he had come to deliver. He walked toward the cabin alone. His pack held the perimeter behind him, 40 wolves, still as a held breath, watching their alpha cross the snow toward a lit window. He did not knock. He looked through the window first. Because Caden Voss had not survived 6 years of absolute rule by walking into rooms without knowing what was in them. He looked through the frosted glass. And everything he had come to do, every word he had constructed during 2 days of searching, every cold and final conclusion he had already reached about what happened to humans who involved themselves in Iron Fang business, all of it stopped. They were there. All 6. By the fireplace. Pressed together in a pile the way they slept when they were very young and the world felt too large, tucked into each other, breathing in the slow, deep rhythm of bodies that have been frightened and are now, finally, safe. Alive. Whole. The one with the broken leg could see the splint. Clean. Properly set. The work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had done it carefully, in the dark, in a storm, for an animal that had no way to ask for help and no way to say thank you. He stood in the snow outside that window and felt something move through him that he did not have immediate access to a name for. It moved through the fury, through the exhaustion, through the 6 years of architecture. Like water finding the places in a structure where the mortar is thinnest. And then he saw her, asleep in the chair beside them. A woman, young, slight, with the kind of face that looks, in sleep, like it has put down something very heavy and is resting before it picks it up again. Her coat was torn. He could see, even through the frosted glass, that it had been torn deliberately in strips. Used for something. Used for them. There was frost still caught in her hair. Her hands were resting open in her lap, and even at this distance, even through glass and darkness, he could see the rawness of them. The cold damage. The evidence of what it had cost her to pull 6 animals from a frozen river in a blizzard and carry them up a mountain and work through the night to keep them breathing. She had given, by the evidence of her own body, almost everything she had. For 6 wolves she did not know. For 6 animals who could not tell her what they were, or who they belonged to, or what it would mean, what it would cost her to be the person who saved them. Caden Voss stood in the snow outside her window for a long time. The words he had come to say were still technically available to him. He did not say them. He had built his entire existence on the principle that strength does not bend. That sentiment is a vulnerability. That the only thing standing between the Iron Fang pack and the chaos that had taken his parents was his absolute unwillingness to be moved by things that did not serve the pack's survival. He believed all of that. He believed it completely. And he stood in the snow, looking at a human woman who had gone back into the dark a second time for the last 3, because she had counted and she did not leave things behind, and he could not make the belief and the window agree with each other. She had saved them, not for reward, not for recognition, not with any knowledge of what they were or who they belonged to or what it meant in any world, human or otherwise, to do what she had done. She had simply heard something small crying in the dark. And she had gone toward it. The way he understood with a clarity that arrived without his permission, that she had always gone toward it. The way she could not stop herself from going toward it. Even when it cost her. Especially when it cost her. He did not leave. He stood at that window until the sky behind the mountain began its slow, great consideration of becoming morning. And for the first time in 6 years, for the first time since the night he became Alpha King and sealed everything soft in himself behind something strong enough to survive on. Caden Voss did not know what to do next. The certainty he had carried for 40 miles through a blizzard had not survived the window. What replaced it was something he had no protocol for. Something that was not fury. Something that was not governance. Something that looked, uncomfortably, like the beginning of a debt he was not sure he knew how to pay. She woke the way she always woke. Not gradually. Not with the slow, reluctant assembly of consciousness that most people perform in the morning, the negotiation between sleep and waking, the gentle inventory of where you are and what day it is and whether the world requires you yet. Lena woke the way field medics wake. All at once. Completely. Every sense arrived simultaneously with the single shared question. What has changed while I was gone? What had changed was the doorway. There was a man in it. Tall, dark-eyed, still in the particular way that things are still when stillness is a choice rather than a default, when the body has the capacity for significant movement and is, for now, electing not to use it. He was looking at her. Not at the pups. Not at the cabin. With an expression that was not readable in any of the ways human expressions are usually readable, that offered no entry point, no foothold, no crack through which she could determine whether what she was looking at was dangerous or simply severe. She had her hunting knife in her hand before she had finished the thought. She didn't remember reaching for it. Her hand remembered. She stood up from the chair. This is worth noting, not because standing up was brave, though it was, but because of what it communicated. She did not press herself back. She did not make herself smaller. She rose to her full height with the knife at her side, and she looked at the man in her doorway with the steady, assessing gaze of someone who has been in rooms with danger before and has learned that the worst thing you can do is let it know you're afraid of it. Even when you are. Even when every reasonable system in your body is filing an urgent and unanimous report. She looked at him. He looked at her. The fire crackled once between them, and neither of them moved. He spoke first. His voice was low and it was even, and it had in it the quality of something that was accustomed to being the last word in any room it entered, not through volume, not through threat, but through a kind of absolute certainty that what it said would be attended to. He asked her how she found them. Not where she found them. Not whether she was the one who had brought them here. He had already established those facts, and she understood that immediately, from the way he asked, the way the question had no preamble and no softness, the way it arrived as though the answer was the only remaining variable in a calculation he had otherwise already completed. She told him, not because she was intimidated, she would tell you, and mean it, that she was not intimidated, and she would be approximately half right, but because she had nothing to hide and no interest in performing mystery for a stranger in her own cabin. She told him about the road, the sound, the riverbank. She told him flatly, without embellishment, the way she had always reported in the field what she found, what condition it was in, what she did about it. He listened. His expression did not change. She finished. He said nothing for a moment that was slightly longer than comfortable, the kind of silence that is itself a form of assessment. She did not apologize. This is important. A different woman might have softened the edges of the telling, might have offered some version of "I hope that was all right" or "I didn't know what else to do," or any of the 100 small verbal concessions people make when they are trying to take up less space in front of something that makes them feel like they are taking up too much. Lena said, "I found them in the river." I brought them here. The leg is splinted, they're all breathing, and you're welcome." Something moved across his face. Gone before she could name it. He did not thank her. She had not expected him to. And then the pups woke up. It happened the way it always happens with young animals after deep recovery. Not gradually, but all at once, a collective waking, a simultaneous re-entry into the world with the full enthusiasm of bodies that have been restored and have not yet learned to be cautious about expressing it. 6 wolf pups, awake and immediately, entirely oriented toward the man in the doorway. The sound they made was not a growl and not a bark. It was something that Lena had no word for, something that was recognition and relief in arrival, something that small creatures make when the specific person they most needed has appeared. They crossed the cabin floor in approximately 4 seconds. And Caden Voss, Alpha King of the Iron Fang Pack, 6 years of absolute authority, a man whose controlled stillness had held through 2 days without sleep and 40 miles of blizzard and the full force of his own fury, went down on one knee. He caught them, all of them, in the way you catch things you thought you might have lost with both arms and no elegance and nothing held back. He checked them. She could see him checking them, hands moving across each small body with a thoroughness that was both efficient and something else entirely, something that had no efficiency in it at all, something that was just a person making sure, making absolutely sure, that what they were holding was real and whole and still here. He found the splinted leg. His hands stilled on it for just a moment. One moment. And in that moment the mask, the controlled, impenetrable, 6 years reinforced mask was simply gone. Not broken, not cracked, just absent. The way a face looks when it forgets, briefly and completely, that anyone else is in the room. Lena watched this from across the cabin. She had seen many things in her life that had rearranged her understanding of the world. She had held people at the border of their own lives and watched them decide which side to come back to. She had seen courage and she had seen terror and she had seen the particular human expression of a person who has decided to survive against the available evidence. She had never seen anything quite like this. A man who was, in every observable dimension, the most formidable thing she had ever been in a room undone, quietly and completely, by 6 small animals climbing on him. Loving them without permission, without restraint, without any apparent awareness that he was doing it. That was the thing that got through. Not his authority. Not the way he filled the doorway. Not the voice or the stillness or the dark eyes that had offered her nothing to read. This unguarded, undefended, unperformed moment of a person who loves something more than they love being formidable. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever seen. Because it meant he was real. And real life was considerably more difficult to be afraid of. And considerably more difficult to stop thinking about. He stood up. The mask came back, not entirely, not with the same seamless completeness it had worn before the pups, but enough. Enough to be functional. Enough to say what he had come to say. He told her she had to come with him. He said it the way he said everything, not as a request, not as a suggestion, not with the conversational architecture of someone who has left room for a different answer. He said it as a fact that had not yet been enacted. She knew too much now. She had seen the pups in ways that human eyes were not supposed to see them. She had been present for things that placed her, by the laws of his world, laws she didn't know existed, in a world she didn't know was real, in a category that required management. Management. That was the word he used. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she told him, with the same flat delivery she had used for everything else, that she did not go anywhere with strangers. She had pulled 6 animals from a river, worked through the night on no sleep with frost-damaged hands, and was currently standing in her own cabin being told by a man she had never met that she needed to be managed. She said, "I don't think so." She said it the way she held the knife, without performance. Without heat. Just a fact, presented cleanly. A different kind of absolute. He looked at her. Really look at her the way she would think later that you look at something that has surprised you, that has arrived in a category you didn't have prepared. And then he told her. Not everything. Not the full architecture of the world she had been living at the edge of for 8 months without knowing it. But enough. He told her the forest was not simply a forest. He told her the pups were not simply wolves. He told her that what she had pulled from the river and splinted and warmed and monitored through the night, what she had named, quietly, in the dark, belonged to a world that had its own laws. Laws older than the ones she knew. Laws that had, by the act of her saving them, now extended to include her. She listened. Her expression did not change. When he finished she said, "I don't believe you." Not with cruelty. Not with dismissal. With the precise, evidence-based skepticism of a woman who has spent her life working in the verifiable and finds the unverifiable an insufficient foundation for decisions. He said, "I know." And something in the way he said it patiently, resigned, as if he had anticipated exactly this and had, in some private part of himself, found it almost worth something made her grip on the knife shift slightly. Not looser. Just different. Something moved at the tree line. Caden felt it before he saw it. She could tell from the way his entire body changed in the space between one breath and the next. The stillness that had read as controlled became something else, became loaded, became directed, became the stillness of something that has identified a target and is making the last set of calculations before it stops being still at all. His head turned toward the window. His eyes, and this was the first thing she noticed, the first impossible thing that her clinical, evidence-based mind could not file away and move past. His eyes had changed color. Gold. Not metaphorically. Not the way people describe warm brown eyes as golden in certain light. Gold. Luminous. Absolute. The eyes of something that was not entirely what it had been presenting itself as. He said, "Stay inside." He said it with the quiet authority of someone who does not expect to have to say things twice. She followed him onto the porch. Because of course she did. What happened next took less than a minute. It is important to understand that in less than a minute, start to finish. Because in the telling it expands, the way moments of genuine shock always expand in the memory, filling more space than the clock would give them, becoming larger than their actual duration because the mind requires more time to process them than time itself allotted for their occurrence. He stepped off the porch. And between one step and the next, between the last moment his boot was on the wood and the first moment it should have reached the snow, he was not a man anymore. She had no framework for what she saw. Her mind attempted, briefly and without success, to apply the available framework's trick of light, trick of her own exhausted perception. Some quality of the pre-dawn dark that was distorting what she was seeing into something her brain was incorrectly assembling. Her mind attempted this for approximately 1 second. Then it stopped attempting and simply recorded. Because what was crossing the snow toward the tree line was large and it was fast and it was beautiful, was the word that arrived without her permission, the word she would be quietly furious about later. It was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are completely and terrifyingly what they are. When there is no compromise in them. When every part of them is built for exactly this. It reached the tree line in seconds. What was there was a scout, she understood later, an advance presence from a rival pack that had been watching, measuring, looking for the moment the Iron Fang Alpha was off his territory and therefore available to be challenged. Did not last long. There was no prolonged engagement. There was a brief, decisive, absolute resolution of the situation. And then it was over. And the thing at the tree line turned back toward the cabin. And became a man again. Walking back through the snow with the same unhurried certainty with which he had crossed it, going the other direction, as if what had just occurred was not extraordinary, was not the restructuring of her entire understanding of what was possible in the world, was simply something that had needed to be handled and had been. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps. Snow on his shoulders. Eyes still gold, fading now, slowly, back toward dark, the way embers fade rather than extinguish. Not gone. Just banked. He looked up at her. She was still on the porch. Still standing. Knife still in her hand. She had not, at any point, put down the knife, and she would not be able to tell you later whether she had held onto it because she still considered him a threat, or because it was the one object in the landscape of the last 60 seconds that she was certain about. The one thing she could identify with complete confidence. A knife. A handle. A blade. Real. Verifiable. Hers. Everything else was under urgent revision. She should have been screaming. Every system she had, every reasonable, self-preserving, rational system was filing the same report. This is the moment you scream. This is the moment you run. This is the moment your body executes the response that the entire history of human survival has been building toward for exactly this kind of situation. She was not screaming. She was not running. She was standing on her porch in the pre-dawn cold with her heart doing something loud and unscheduled in her chest. Looking at a man with fading gold eyes and snow on his shoulders, a man who was, by every available evidence, not entirely a man, and she was thinking, I have never felt more awake than I do right now. Not since the field. Not since the nights when everything was immediate and the margin was thin and the world contracted to exactly the size of the crisis in front of her and there was no room in it for anything except being completely, utterly present. She had not felt that in 8 months. She had not realized, until this exact moment, how much she had missed it. How much she had missed herself. He looked at her standing there, knife in hand, unbroken, unrun, looking back at him with those steady, impossible eyes, and something shifted in his expression. Not the mask. Something underneath the mask. Something that had been very quiet for a very long time and was, in the presence of this specific woman on this specific porch at this specific unreasonable hour, becoming slightly less quiet. He said nothing. She said nothing. The mountain held them both in its early morning silence, the forest behind him, the cabin behind her, the 6 pups watching from the window with their clear, uncomplicated eyes. And the night, which remembers everything, added this to what it keeps. The moment 2 people who were built, by entirely different forces and entirely different griefs, to be alone. We looked at each other. And neither of them looked away. He stayed. Not because she invited him. Not because he asked. The rival pack's presence at the tree line had changed the calculation. Moving 6 young wolves across open ground with an unknown number of scouts in the surrounding forest was not a risk that Caden Voss's particular brand of absolute, non-negotiable responsibility to his pack would permit. So he stayed. This is what he told himself. This is what he told her. The mountain, which had been watching both of them for considerably longer than either of them knew, registered this explanation and said nothing. The cabin, which had been built for one, arranged itself around 2 people with the particular awkwardness of a space that is accustomed to a single presence and is uncertain what to do with the addition. Caden stood near the window. Lena moved through the space she knew, making tea, checking on the pups, doing the small, deliberate things that people do when they need their hands occupied and their face pointed somewhere neutral. She was aware of him the way you are aware of a fire in a room, not always looking directly at it, but always knowing exactly where it is. Always registering its heat without requiring your eyes to confirm it. He was watching her. She was pretending not to notice. They were both aware that she was pretending. Neither of them addressed this. She asked about the pups first. This was, she would understand later, the right question, not because it was safe, not because it avoided the larger conversation that was assembling itself in the room whether either of them had requested it or not, but because it was true. She was genuinely, specifically curious. About their ages, their names, why they had been near the border, what they were when they were not what she had seen them as, small wolves, hypothermic and frightened and trusting her without any reason to. He answered. Briefly, at first. The way someone answers who is not accustomed to being asked questions that are not about territory or threat assessment or the logistics of governance, questions that are simply about knowing. About interest. About one person wanting to understand the texture of another person's world. She asked another question. He answered that one too. Slightly less briefly. She asked about the pack. About the Northern Realm. About the laws he had mentioned, the old ones, the blood ones, the ones that had apparently extended themselves to include her without consulting her on the matter. And somewhere in the space between her 3rd question and his 4th answer, Caden Voss did something he had not done in a long time. He talked. Not reported. Not briefed. Not delivered information with the efficient, minimal architecture of a man who communicates in order to accomplish rather than in order to be known. He talked. Slowly. Like a door opening that had been closed long enough to be stiff. Like a language being spoken that has not been used in years and requires a moment to remember that it is still available. She listened the way she listened to everything, completely, without interruption, without the social performance of listening that involves nodding at intervals and inserting small sounds of comprehension. She simply received what he said. And this, he would think later of this particular quality of her attention. The way it asked nothing of what it received except to be honest was more disarming than anything else she had done. More disarming than the knife. More disarming than not running. She listened like the truth was welcome. He had forgotten what that felt like. It was she who noticed his eyes move to the medical kit. It sat on the table where she had left it after the night before, open, organized, the way she always left it. Everything in its place. Everything labeled. The kind of order that people maintain when order is the thing standing between them and the memory of when things were not orderly. When things were very far from orderly. When the kit was open and the supplies were going and the math was not working out. He looked at it the way perceptive people look at things that tell them more than the object itself contains. He asked one question, quiet, without the authority register, without the command texture. Just a question, offered the same way she had offered hers, as genuine interest. as one person wanting to understand the shape of another person's history. She looked at the kit. She looked at him, and she told him, not everything, not the full topography of it, the specific date, the specific place, the specific faces of the specific people she had not been able to bring back, no matter how steady her hands were or how fast she moved or how completely she refused to accept the available evidence of what was happening. But the shape of it. She told him about the field. About what it had been to work in the dark with the clock running and the margin shrinking, and the absolute, non-negotiable belief that if she was good enough and fast enough and present enough, she could hold the line between here and not here for anyone who came to her. She told him about the night she couldn't. About the particular quality of the silence after. The way it was different from other silences, heavier, more specific, the silence of a world that had just become a slightly different shape than it was before and was not going to change back. She told him about the 2 bags and the cash and the mountain and the cabin and the animals she found and did not name out loud. She told him all of it in the same flat, unembellished way. She told him everything not because she was without feeling about it, but because the feeling lived underneath the telling, and she had learned, in the field, that feelings and function could coexist only if the feelings knew their place. When she finished, the fire had burned lower. He had not moved. He said nothing for a moment, not the assessing silence from before, not the calculating pause of a man determining his next position. Just silence. The kind that means, I heard you. The kind that does not rush to fill itself with response because it understands that what was just said required more than response. Required simply witness. He gave her that. She had not expected it from him. She did not know what to do with it. So she looked at the fire and waited. He told her about the night he became alpha. He did not preface it. Did not frame it. Did not build toward it the way people build toward the things that cost them the most to say. He simply began. His parents had been the Iron Fang's alpha pair. His father, the previous king, had been the kind of leader whose authority came not from fear but from something rarer and more difficult. From being genuinely worth following. From being the kind of man whose pack would walk into any darkness he named because they had seen him walk into darkness first. There had been a challenge. Not from within, from outside. From a rival bloodline that had been building toward it for years, waiting for the right moment, the right weakness, the right night. They had found it. Caden had been 24. Away on the eastern boundary, managing a dispute that he understood now, with the clarity of hindsight, had been manufactured. Had been designed to remove him from the equation for exactly long enough. He had felt it before the messenger arrived. Something in the pack bond, that deep, cellular, below-language connection that runs between an alpha and his bloodline, had sent up a signal that bypassed every rational system he had and landed in the oldest part of him as a single, devastating word. Gone. He returned to find his pack leaderless, his territory contested, and 6 small siblings who were far too young to understand what had happened and were looking at him with eyes that asked the only question that mattered in that moment. Are you still here? He said, yes, and then he made it true. For 6 years he had been making it true, every decision, every boundary held, every challenge answered. Every morning he rose and put on the weight of it again, all of it in service of the answer he had given 6 frightened children on the worst night of his life. Yes, I am still here. I will not leave you. I will not let anything take you. Lena listened. She did not say, I'm sorry. She did not say, that must have been so hard. She did not offer any of the social scaffolding that people erect around grief to make it more manageable, more contained, more comfortable for the person who doesn't have to carry it. She said, that's why you came alone to the window. He looked at her. She said, before you knocked. You looked through the window first. You had 40 wolves with you and you sent yourself to the window alone, because if something had happened to them inside, if they hadn't been alive, you didn't want your pack to see your face. The silence that followed was of a different quality than any silence that had come before it. It was the silence of a person who has been seen. Accurately. Completely. Without permission. By someone who had known him for less than a day. 2 broken people. 1 frozen mountain. A fire burning lower between them. And 6 sleeping wolves who had wandered past a border they were too young to understand, and fallen into a frozen river. And been pulled out by the one human on the mountain who could not walk away from something small and frightened and running out of time, and had, without any of the 4 parties involved understanding what they were doing, built a bridge between 2 worlds that had never been meant to touch. It was later. The pups were asleep again in the deep, uncomplicated sleep of the young and the restored. The fire had been rebuilt. The tea had been replaced with something warmer. The cabin had settled into a quiet that was no longer awkward, that had become, without announcement, simply shared. He told her about Pack Touched. He said it carefully, the way you say things that are important and old and not easily translated into a language that did not grow up alongside them. In the Northern Realm, he told her, there was a law older than any alpha, older than any bloodline, older than the Iron Fang name or the territory it governed. A law that predated the divisions between packs. That existed before the concept of rival or ally, before borders had been drawn and contested and redrawn. Pack Touched. The name given to a human in the rare, near mythological instances it had ever occurred, who saved the young of a pack at cost to themselves. Who went into the water, who gave the code, who worked through the night, who went back a second time for the ones left behind. Not as a transaction, not for reward or recognition or any return. Simply because the young were in danger and the person was there, and walking away was not something they were built to do. A pack-touched human was considered, by every pack in the Northern Realm, without exception and without override, to be sacred. Protected, claimed not as possession, but as ward. As a responsibility. As someone the pack had been given, by the oldest law it knew, the honor of guarding. The pack whose young had been saved was bound, by that same law, to treat the pack-touched human's life as equivalent to pack life. Every wolf, every member, for as long as she lived. Lena looked at him. He looked back. She laughed. Not unkindly, it was not a dismissive laugh, not a mocking one. It was the laugh of a person who has had an extraordinary 24 hours and has just been told something that, even within the context of those extraordinary hours, required a moment of release. Of the tension between the world she had understood before yesterday and the world she was apparently living in now. She laughed and said, "So your entire pack is sworn to guard my life?" She said, "Because I pulled some puppies out of a river." She said it the way you say something when you are testing whether it sounds as improbable out loud as it does inside your head. It did. She waited for him to confirm that she had misunderstood. That there was a clause. That the ancient law had a footnote she had missed. He did not smile. He said, "Yes, just that, yes," with the complete, unqualified certainty of a man for whom the law he had just described was not remarkable or improbable, was simply true, in the way that gravity is true, in the way that cold is true. Not requiring defense or elaboration. Simply the nature of things. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, through the window, she could see the tree line. And in the pre-dawn dark, still there, still perfectly, impossibly still, the shapes she had been aware of since she first walked back inside. Shapes at the perimeter. Patient. Watching. 40 wolves. Standing guard. Not because they had been ordered to in the conventional sense, not because the Alpha King had pointed at the perimeter and assigned a shift. Because the law said so. Because she had earned it without knowing she was earning anything. Because one night, one frozen river, and one woman who could not walk away had set in motion something that the oldest rules of the oldest world she had never known existed had been waiting, perhaps, for a very long time to activate. She thought about the 2 bags. The cache. The narrow road. The cabin at the edge of the forest she had chosen because it was the furthest from everything she could get without disappearing entirely. She had come here to be alone. She had been so certain that alone was what she needed. So certain that the world beyond her porch had nothing left in it that was worth the cost of re-entering it. She looked at the man across the fire from her. She looked at the 6 sleeping wolves between them. She looked at the shapes in the dark outside her window, 40 of them, steady and silent and, by the oldest law of a world she had not known was real, hers. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The mountain already knew. The night had already added it to what it keeps. The moment the walls came down. Not with a sound, not with an announcement, just quietly. The way frost releases from a window when the room inside has finally, after a long cold night, become warm enough. She was not alone anymore. She just hadn't decided yet whether to be afraid of that. Or grateful. Midnight. Not the symbolic midnight of stories, not the hour used as metaphor, as threshold, as the moment the narrative has decided things must change. Actually midnight. The precise center of the dark. And the forest, which had been holding something back for hours, which had been patient in the particular way of things that have decided on an outcome and are simply waiting for the moment the waiting ends stopped holding it back. Lena felt it before she heard it. A pressure change. Something in the air of the cabin that had been settled became unsettled, the way a flame will lean before the wind arrives, responsive to something the room has not yet named. And then the sound hit the tree line like a wall collapsing. Not howls. Something below howls. Something that the body receives not through the ears but through the chest, through the bones, through the oldest and least articulate part of a person that exists entirely below language and knows, without being told, when it is in the presence of something that intends harm. Caden was at the window before the sound finished. His eyes were already gold. He turned to her. One look. Not a command, or not only a command. Something in it that was more than instruction, that carried in its brevity everything the last several hours had built between them: the fire, the words, the walls that had come quietly down, compressed into a single moment of eye contact that said, "I need you to be safe. I need to know you are safe so that I can do what I have to do." She received it. She nodded once. He went through the door. She moved fast. The table against the door first, heavy, deliberate, no wasted motion. The pups awake now, on their feet, pressing together in the corner, she directed them to with a low sound and her body between them and the rest of the room. Her knife in her hand. Her back to the fireplace. She could hear the fight outside. She did not look through the window. Not because she was afraid of what she would see. She had looked at difficult things before, had made herself look when looking was part of the work, but because looking was not the work right now. Right now the work was the room. The pups. The door. She held the room. For 4 minutes she held it, tracking the sounds outside, monitoring the pups behind her, keeping her breathing level and her hands steady in the way she had trained them to be steady regardless of what the rest of her was doing. 4 minutes. And then the window exploded inward. Large. That was the first word her mind produced. The second word was, between it and the pups. She was already moving when the second word arrived. What entered through the window was not small, and it was not cautious, and it had not come to negotiate. It had come because the perimeter had been drawn thin by the larger engagement outside, and this was the calculation the rival pack had been building toward. Not the alpha. Not the 40 wolves at the boundary. The interior. The soft center. What it found in the interior was Lena Calloway, standing between it and the pups, with a knife, and the particular expression of a woman who has already decided. She did not freeze. This is the thing about people who have spent years in crisis, not the people who have survived one crisis, not the people who have a story about the time they faced something terrible and rose to it, but the people who have lived inside crisis long enough for the body to understand that freezing is a choice and choosing otherwise is a trainable response. Her body did not freeze. Her body did what it had been built to do. She used the knife. She used the table, the fireplace, the geometry of the room she had been living in for 8 months and knew in the dark. Knew in the way you know a space when it is yours and you have moved through it enough times that it has become an extension of your own body's understanding of where it is in the world. She used all of it. She was smaller and she was human and she was, by every measurable standard, outmatched. She did not behave like it. The wall came in, not the door or the wall. The actual structural wall of the cabin, to the left of the fireplace, gave way under something that hit it with the full intention of going through it and did. And Caden Voss came through the opening. Human form barely, still shifting back, still arriving in the shape the situation required him to be in, and his eyes swept the room with the speed of someone who has been calculating what they are going to find for the last 30 seconds and is terrified of being right. He found her, standing, breathing hard, the particular breathing of someone who has spent everything they had and is running on the other side of it now, on the pure adrenaline reserve that the body keeps for after. Knife still in hand. Still between the pups and the rest of the room. The rival wolf was down. She was standing over it. Still standing. He had fought 100 battles. Had stood in the center of every one of them with the cold, functional certainty of a man who had removed fear from his operational vocabulary because fear was a distraction and he could not afford distraction. He had never lost. He had never, in 100 battles, felt what he felt standing in that broken wall looking at Lena Calloway still on her feet. It moved through him like a fault line shifting. Deep. Structural. The kind of thing that does not make noise when it happens but changes the entire landscape above it. It was not a relief. The relief was too small, too simple, too one note for what this was. It was not pride, though it was that too, underneath, in the way that you are proud of something that had no obligation to be extraordinary and was extraordinary anyway. It was the specific terror of a person who has just understood, at full depth, what they stand to lose. He had spent 6 years building a world in which there was nothing that could be used against him. Nothing that, if taken, would take him with it. He stood in the broken wall of her cabin and looked at a woman he had known for less than a day and understood, with the complete and unargued clarity of something that does not ask permission before it becomes true. That the architecture had changed. Without his approval, without his awareness, somewhere between the window and the fire and the words and the walls coming quietly down. She had gotten in. The rival pack retreated before dawn. Not in defeat exactly, in the calculation that the cost of continuing had exceeded the available return. That the Iron Fang Alpha on his own was a significant variable. The Iron Fang Alpha with 40 wolves and something additional to protect something that had changed the quality of his fighting in ways the rival pack's tacticians had not modeled for was a different equation entirely. They went back into the dark. And as they went, the Iron Fang pack moved. Not in pursuit. Inward. 40 wolves drew toward the cabin in a slow, deliberate contraction, closing the perimeter, tightening the circle, until they stood in a ring around the structure so complete and so still that the cabin sat at the center of it like something precious inside a closed hand. One by one, they lowered their heads. Not in exhaustion, not in defeat. In the gesture that, in the language of the Iron Fang bloodline, meant something that had no clean translation into any human tongue but meant, as close as translation could reach. You are ours to keep. We see you. We are here. Lena stood on the porch. Caden stood beside her, not close enough to touch. Close enough that the distance between them was no longer neutral, was no longer simply the space between two people, but the space between two people who are aware of each other in a specific, irreversible way that cannot be undone once it has begun. She looked at the circle of wolves around her cabin. 40 heads bowed in the snow. 40 members of the most feared bloodline in the Northern Realm, arranged around a human woman's home like a living wall, like a vow given physical form, like the oldest law making itself visible. Because of one night, one frozen river, one woman who heard something cry in the dark and did not, could not, would not walk away. She felt him turn to look at her. She kept her eyes on the circle for a moment longer, letting it be real, letting the world she was standing in, this world she had not known existed, that had existed alongside her ordinary one for 8 months while she drove north and paid cash and tried to disappear, letting it be the world she was in now. Hers, whether she had chosen it or not, whether she was ready or not. She turned to look at him. He said, "You're not alone anymore." 3 words and a contraction. Said the way he said everything, without decoration, without softening, without the performance of emotion that people put on when they want to be seen feeling rather than simply felt. Said like a fact. Said like, "The temperature outside is below freezing." Said like, "The sun will come up in an hour." Said like something that simply is, that was always going to be, that the mountain has known and the night has remembered, and the river, the frozen river where everything began, had understood from the very first moment. 6 small wolves went in and 1 woman went in after them. "You are not alone anymore." She looked at him. His eyes dark again now, the gold banked, the long night settling into the face of a man who had not slept in 3 days and was, for the first time in all of them, not moving. Not searching. Not managing or governing or calculating. Just here. Just a present. Just looking at her the way you look at something you have decided to stop pretending you don't need. She didn't argue. She thought about arguing. She was a woman who had driven north until the roads ran out specifically to be alone, who had paid cash and kept no friends and spoke to no one, and built, with great intention and considerable discipline, a life in which needing no one was the primary structural feature. She thought about all of that. She looked at the circle of wolves in the snow. She looked at the man beside her. She looked at the cabin behind them, the broken wall, the firelight through the window, the 6 small shapes pressed together in the warmth inside. She didn't argue. The mountain held the moment the way it holds everything. Quietly, without comment. The night added it to what keeps this specific dawn, this specific porch, this specific silence between 2 people who came to it broken and separated and by entirely different roads. It keeps the frost in her hair. It keeps his eyes going dark. It keeps the circle of bowed heads in the snow. It keeps the moment she does not argue. Because the night has a memory. And it remembers everything, especially the beginning, especially the ones that did not look like beginnings. That looked, from the outside, like a woman pulling wolves from a frozen river in a blizzard. That looked like an accident. That looked like a chance. That the mountain knew had always known was neither. Lena Calloway came to the mountains to disappear. This is where we began. A woman with 2 bags and a medical kit and the very deliberate intention of being no one. I need no one. asking nothing of the world and expecting nothing in return because expectation is just grief that hasn't happened yet, and she had already had enough of that to last. She chose the edge of a forest she wasn't supposed to enter. She chose a cabin that the realtor seemed relieved to be rid of. She chose silence. She chose alone. And the mountain let her believe, for 8 months, that she had succeeded. The mountain is patient that way. It has held longer stories than this one. It knows that the life a person is running from has a way of sending ahead of itself quietly, without announcing the exact conditions required to make running impossible. 6 wolf pups. A frozen river. A storm that moved faster than the morning sky had suggested. And a woman who had never been able to walk past something small and frightened and running out of time. Caden Voss did not come to that cabin expecting to be changed. He came with 40 wolves and 6 years of absolute certainty and the full intention of delivering a conclusion. He left with something he had no protocol for. Something that had gotten through every wall he had ever built, not by force, not by strategy, but simply by being exactly, undeniably itself. A woman with frost in her hair and a knife she never put down, and the particular quality of attention that makes the truth feel welcome. He had not planned for her. Nothing in 6 years of ironclad planning had included her. The river had not consulted his plans. Sometimes the life you are running from is not behind you. Sometimes it has been waiting at the end of the narrow road, past the point where the map runs out, at the edge of a forest you were never supposed to enter, as patient as the mountain, quiet as snow. Waiting for the night you stop running long enough to hear something cry out in the dark. And go toward it, the way you always were going to. The way you could not have stopped yourself from doing. Even if you had known what it would cost. Even if you had known what it would change. Especially then. The night remembers Lena Calloway. Standing on her porch in the pre-dawn cold with a circle of wolves bowed in the snow around her cabin and an alpha king beside her who has just said the truest thing he has said in 6 years. Not arguing. Finally, after everything, not arguing. If this story held you from the first word. If you felt the cold of that river, if you stood on that porch, if some part of you recognized something in Lena's stillness or Caden's walls or the particular ache of 2 people finding each other in the last place either of them was looking, then you are exactly who this channel was built for. And I am very glad you're here. If Caden and Lena have earned a part 2 in your mind, if you are sitting with questions the story left open, if you need to know what happens in the morning when the circle breaks and the real world reasserts itself and 2 people who came together in a crisis have to decide whether what they found was real or only the intensity of the night making everything feel larger than it was. Hit the like button. That is how I know. That is how their story continues. Subscribe, and turn on notifications because this channel releases new stories every single week. Werewolf. Alpha romance. Dark fantasy. The kind of stories that begin in the silence before the howl and don't let go until the last word. You will not want to miss what comes next. And before you go, I want to know something. Drop it in the comments. Team Lena. Or Team Caden. Who had your heart in this one? The woman who went back into the dark for 3 more. Or the man who came through a wall to reach her? Tell me. I read every single one. Until next time, stay brave, stay curious, and the next time you are walking past a frozen river in the dark, listen, just listen. You never know what the night is trying to give you.